In today's episode, we've got lion-proof rabbis, a Hollywood legend, and suing the Jews. It's time for your Jewish Week. Hey everyone, welcome to Your Jewish Week, the podcast for everything Jewish in the week ahead. I'm Rabbi Dovi. As always, this podcast is produced by Chabad.org and dedicated to all our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. May Hashem keep them safe from all harm, and may all the hostages finally be freed to return to their families and loved ones. Today is Sunday, the 19th of Sivan, and if you happen to be spending Shabbat in the beautiful town of Medicine Hat, Alberta, you'll find Shabbat candlelighting time this Friday coming in at 9:18 p.m., which is wild. It's enough to make me consider moving to Canada, except I'm allergic to moose. That location was suggested by one of our listeners from Canada, by the way, so if you've got an idea for a place to feature next week, feel free to let us know in the comments. And as always, halachic times for your location can be found quickly and easily at Chabad.org/times. Starting us off, as always, with the weekly Torah portion, this week we'll be reading Parshas Shelach. We open with Hashem giving Moshe the option of sending spies to the land of Canaan in advance of the Jewish people arriving there and conquering the place. Moshe takes him up on that and appoints one spy from each tribe for a total of 12. Now, these aren't just random guys. These are very distinguished, prestigious people. Included among them is Yehoshua, Moshe's primary student and later successor. Before they head out, Moshe gives them a little pep talk. He tells them to scout out the land and figure out the best way to conquer it. Of course, Hashem had already assured the Jews that they would be able to conquer it, but as a rule, we're always supposed to do the best we can on our end within the rules of nature and not rely on a miracle. So off they go, 12 spies on a grand tour of Israel. It takes them 40 days, which is miraculously fast, but when they show up back at the camp, they veer wildly off script. Instead of reporting back the best strategies to conquer the land, they volunteer their own little op-ed on whether it's feasible to conquer the land at all. This was, of course, not the assignment. To make things worse, their conclusion is that the land is too fortified to conquer. The people are too strong, the cities are too secure, even the produce is freakishly big. They even bring back some enormous fruit as a visual aid. We're talking a cluster of grapes that takes like 8 people to carry. Now, the spies took these gigantic fruits not as a sign of the tremendous fertility and blessing in the soil, but as a sign that the land was unnatural, freakish, and unwholesome. And that was because their op-ed, like all op-eds, had an agenda: to scare the Jews off from ever attempting to enter the land of Israel and keep them in the desert indefinitely. Yehoshua and another spy named Kalev are the only dissenting voices. They attempt to reassure the people that Hashem will help them, but their voices are drowned out by the panicked mob who are about to lynch them when the glory of Hashem finally appears over the Mishkan, shutting everybody up instantly. The principal is in the room and the Jews are in big trouble. Having doubted Hashem's ability to bring them into the land, they have lost their opportunity to enter it. Instead, they will wander in the desert for 40 years, 1 year for each day of the spies' tour, until all adult males are dead, at which point their children, the next generation, will enter the land. That brings us to the middle of Wednesday's reading, when we've got an interesting postscript to the story. A group of Jews, shocked into reality by Hashem's harsh pronouncement, make a desperate last-ditch effort to enter the land. Moshe tries to warn them that Hashem is not going to be with them in their attempt, but they ignore him and are tragically massacred by the enemy. At this point, we're going to switch out of narrative mode, and going into Thursday, we'll be learning the laws of various sacrifices and the accompanying wine, oil, and flour offerings that come along with them. Friday, we'll discuss the obligation to give a portion of our dough to a Kohen every time we make bread. This mitzvah is called challah, and we still observe it to this day, with one significant change. Instead of being eaten by a Kohen, the dough is burned. And that's because eating challah requires a high degree of ritual purity that we aren't able to achieve in our times until Mashiach comes. Over the years, the term challah kind of got broadened to include the sweet bread that we traditionally bake for Shabbat. You've probably heard that called challah as well. We'll also find out what to do in the unlikely event that the Sanhedrin, the supreme halachic court of the land, mistakenly rules an act of idolatry to be permitted, and the people act on that ruling. Not sure exactly how the brightest minds in Judaism could ever get something so catastrophically wrong, but in the unlikely event it does occur, Your seat cushion can be used as a flotation device. Shabbat, we dip into narrative mode real quick to tell the story of a man who was found desecrating the Shabbat, which is super disappointing, seeing as the Jews literally just were given the mitzvah like 3 seconds ago. And this is why we can't have nice things. And finally, we finish the parsha with the commandment to wear tzitzis, or tzitzit, or Jew strings if you want. We recite this passage numerous times a day in the Shema portion of our prayers. By wearing these fringes on the corners of our garments, we remember how Hashem took us out of Egypt, and we're inspired to follow His commandments and resist the sinful urges of our hearts, such as the urge to touch wet paint to see if the wet paint sign is still telling the truth. Parshas Shelach contains 119 verses, with the memory key being the word palat, which means to be spared or given refuge. Fun fact, that's the root word of my own name, Paltiel, which translates loosely as Hashem has given me refuge, so this memory key feels very close to home for me. Palat can also mean spit, but we don't focus on that one. As always, check out the link in the show notes for more insight into this week's keys. In the weekly Tanya, the Alter Rebbe just got done explaining how Hashem hides His presence from us so we can feel as though we're independent entities. Now, why exactly did Hashem set up this whole arrangement? In Sunday's reading, the Alter Rebbe gives us an interesting insight. A king can only be called a king if he rules over others. You can't be a king if the whole nation consists of your kids. I mean, you can try, but chances are they'll mount an insurrection and defect over to their mom. But in all seriousness, it's more a matter of definition. Being a king means nothing if all your subjects are just part of you. You need them to be others, independent people who choose to accept your sovereignty. It's kind of the same thing with Hashem. He gives us the gift of free will, gives us a sense of self, so we can accept His kingship and He can rule over us. That's why Hashem's creative energy is associated with the attribute of malchus, kingship. That word defines the facet of Hashem that grants us room to feel as though we exist, so that we can truly choose Him as our king and be His subjects in every sense of the word. Now, obviously, this illusion only works from our perspective. It's like a one-way mirror. Hashem sees things the way they truly are. It's all Him. And that true perspective, the universe as Hashem sees it, is what gives rise to yichud, oneness, the understanding that Hashem is truly all there is. Now, starting on Tuesday, we're going to be heading into some really deep waters that I definitely can't do justice to in this format, so please go learn it yourselves, but here's the bare bones of it. We started this whole adventure by asking a simple question. How can the Zohar speak about two kinds of divine unity? What's up with that? Well, here's what's up with that. Divine unity does, in fact, come in two flavors. One kind of divine unity says that everything's an illusion. Malchus, that element of kingship that gives us our perception of independence, that's fake too. It's all nothing in front of Hashem's transcendent, true oneness. Now, we call that perspective the higher oneness, or in Aramaic, Yehuda Ilah. The second, lower flavor says, not quite. Malchus is a thing, and the world, to a certain extent, is a thing as well. But Malchus itself, the world itself, is nothing other than a facet of Hashem's true oneness. And that means, as we'll discover on Thursday, going to the end of the week, that even here on this physical earth, within our own perspective, it's all Hashem. There's nothing that isn't Him, and no place that He is not. And if those two flavors of unity sound like the same thing, go learn it yourself. That's my best shot at it, and I'm already over time. Moving on to the daily Rambam, the 3-chapter and Sefer HaMitzvos tracks are continuing with the laws of oaths on Sunday and wrapping up on Monday. Tuesday, we're on to the laws of Nedarim. Nedarim gets translated as commitments or vows or pledges, and the truth is that none of those translations really quite cover it. They all go halfway, but in all fairness, that's because Nedarim is a funny concept. It's an umbrella term for two pretty distinct things. One kind of neder is a verbal commitment to bring a certain animal as a sacrifice, and the other is a vow to restrict yourself from something, like a thing or an action or a person. It's a pretty complicated set of laws, so we'll be sticking with it all the way until Shabbat, when we'll begin the laws of Nazarites. A Nazarite is someone who takes a vow of spiritual abstinence that includes growing their hair long and avoiding grape products and contact with a corpse, and we'll be continuing those laws into next week. In the 1-chapter track, we're continuing where we left off right at the end of last week with the precautions the Torah puts in place to protect our health and safety. That includes not eating an animal that's been bitten by a snake, not giving your travel itinerary to a potential highway robber, and not selling weapons to a known bandit. All pretty intuitive stuff. Monday, we'll move on to the obligation to help your friend whose donkey is falling under its burden. It's kinda the biblical equivalent of having a flat tire. The Torah instructs us to pull over and help him out. And with that, we're finished with the 11th book of the Mishnah Torah, on to book number 12, Sefer Kinyan, which is all about acquiring stuff. We'll start with the fundamental principle. In Jewish law, you don't become the owner of an item just by paying for it. You have to do a certain action that demonstrates your acquisition. That's called a kinyan, hence the name of the book, Sefer Kinyan. There's tons of ways to make a kinyan, and the concept of a kinyan doesn't only apply to buying and selling, but that's what we're going to start off with on Tuesday and straight through to next week. As always, if you'd like to learn more about anything you just heard, or if you're ready to join one of the daily study cycles, check out the show notes for links and resources. All right, with the weekly overview done, it's time to take it day by day. Sunday, the 19th of Sivan, is the yahrzeit of someone you've probably never heard of before, but should definitely know about. This great rabbi was Moroccan, as in Moroccan and rollin. He lived in a city named after a hat, he made stuff out of gold, and he miraculously survived getting chucked into a pit of actual lions. I'm talking about Rabbi Yehuda ibn Attar, who passed away on this date in the year 1733. He served as the rabbi in the city of Fez, not to be confused with the city of Sombrero, and was respected by Jews and Muslims alike. He refused to take a salary for his rabbinical work, instead choosing to earn his living on the side as a goldsmith. On one legendary occasion, the local sultan kidnapped Rabbi Yehuda for ransom and then threw him into a pit of lions when the community couldn't pay up. Miraculously, the lions refused to touch him, and the sultan had him removed from the pit and officially apologized to him. And of all the details in the story, I find the apology to be the funniest. I mean, how do you apologize to someone for throwing him into a pit of lions to die? Get them flowers and a card? Anyway, Rabbi Yehuda ibn Attar was buried in Morocco, where you can still see his tomb, which features a large image of a lion. Moving on to Thursday, it's been a while since we had one of those delightful local Purims that we love to feature on this podcast, and this week we still don't have one, but we do have an interesting date in the timeline of the big Purim, the one in Persia. On this day, the 23rd of Sivan, Haman's decree was officially counteracted. Now, Haman himself had been killed over 2 months earlier, but it was only now that King Ahasuerus authorized Mordechai and Esther to respond to the genocidal decree that Haman had enacted, which was still in force. As recorded in the Megillah, the decree itself could not be cancelled. No royal edict could. Instead, Mordechai and Esther signed a new decree into law, entitling the Jews to defend themselves from their enemies, which they did with great success. And so now, every year on the 15th of Adar, we eat probably a little too much and drink definitely a little too much, as is customary with our collection of averted genocides. We've got quite a few. And finally, Shabbat, the 25th of Sivan, being the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh, is Shabbos Mevorchim, the week in which we bless the new month, right before the Musaf prayers in our morning davening. Chabad custom is to wake up early in the morning to recite the entire book of Tehillim and come together for a lively Farbrengen gathering in the afternoon. In Jewish history, the 25th of Sivan is a pretty eclectic one. We've got a few historical dates from all over the map. Most recently, in 1933, this day marked the yahrzeit of the inimitable Yasala Rosenblatt, one of the most famous cantors in history. If you're not familiar with Jewish cantorial music, it's a traditional way of singing the prayers that has been described as roughly similar to the sound of a prolonged yawn, which it has also been known to elicit. It's been said that people who can sing are called singers, and people who can't are called cantors. I'm joking, of course, that's just when I do it. Actual cantorial music, or chazanas in Hebrew, can be a powerful, soul-stirring experience when it's done right, and Yasala Rosenblatt was one of the people who did it really right. His voice was known to be particularly sweet, and simply on a musical level, he was tremendously talented and versatile. And in a way that was really unusual for the time, he became wildly popular. He met the President of the United States. He was personally asked by the legendary Toscanini to sing in one of his operas. He turned it down. He so impressed Enrico Caruso that the opera star personally climbed onto the stage and kissed him after a performance. He even starred in the first ever Hollywood film to have sound. It's called The Jazz Singer. He appeared as himself, singing Kaddish. I actually had no idea about this until I researched this episode. I think it's fascinating. And of greater interest to this podcast, Yasala Rosenblatt also played a role in Chabad history. He was one of the thousands of people who thronged to greet the previous Rebbe at the pier when he arrived in New York, and I've heard it reported that the previous Rebbe himself listened to Yasala's recordings and enjoyed them very much. So Yosela Rosenblatt was a celebrity cantor, basically. But I think what really made him resonate with people was the fact that this was all real for him. When he sang the words of prayer, he wasn't performing. His entire life, he was a deeply committed Jew who turned down many lucrative offers to stay true not just to the letter of Jewish law, but the spirit of it, the traditions, the piety, the refined life of a chassid. There's no way to fake that, and it gave him this unique authenticity that made him, and rightfully so, into a legend in his lifetime and beyond. Jumping backwards about 2,000 years, the 25th of Sivan was the day when three towering scholars, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, and Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim, were brutally put to death by the Romans. They're three of the 10 famous martyrs that we read about on Yom Kippur, and the story of their death and the millions of other Jews that were killed by the Romans during that period is truly horrifying. But I want to end this week on another note, and to do that we'll have to jump back another 200 years to the 4th century BCE. Now, to preface, we've had a lot of enemies over the centuries, and they've tried to do lots of stuff to us. They've tried to rob us, kill us, take our wives, take our kids, convert us, exile us, make fun of our noses. But then there's something else which is perhaps less common, trying to sue us. We've seen a lot of that in the UN and whatever, and you might think it's a recent development, but it's actually really, really old. So here's the story as it's recounted in the Talmud. A delegation of Egyptian diplomats appeared before Alexander the Great and tried to sue the Jews. Why? Simple. Remember when we left Egypt, we took all their stuff? It's right there in the Torah. We took the Egyptians' gold, silver, clothing. We cleaned out the whole country. Well, now that Alexander the Great conquered both Israel and Egypt, isn't it only right that he make the Jews pay it back? Well, that's what the Egyptians thought, so they sued the Jews. Alexander heard their claim, and he opened the floor for the Jews to put in a rebuttal. And that's when an unassuming hunchback named Geviha ben Pesisa stepped forward. He turned to the Egyptians and he's like, "Where are you getting this whole story from?" So they're like, "Well, it's in the Torah." "Oh," he says, "so you believe the Torah now, do you? In that case, you also believe the Torah when it says that your ancestors enslaved the Jews for 210 years. That's roughly 600,000 men working around the clock for a couple generations. So do a little back-of-the-envelope math here, and I don't think we owe you anything. In fact, I'm going to take the opportunity to countersue. Let's figure out the wages of an entire nation for 210 years, plus vacation and dental, and then deduct the stuff we took from you by the Exodus, and you pay us the difference." So the Egyptians were stunned. They asked for a couple days to think it over and promptly ran away, leaving all their stuff behind. And as a final kick in the rear, Alexander gave all their stuff, once again, to the Jews. This event was celebrated in Talmudic times as a mini holiday, and I think it's very relevant for us today as well. Once again, we are being demonized by an enemy who tries to position themselves as the voice of fairness, of justice. They claim that we stole the Holy Land and used that supposedly just claim as an excuse to do what they've always done, to hate us, to oppose us, to obstruct us in our divinely ordained mission of bringing holiness to the world. Like Geviha ben Pesisa, we have to stand strong and remember, we have absolutely nothing to apologize for. Hashem created the entire world, and He chose us as His nation, and He gave us this land as an eternal inheritance. In his argument, Geviha ben Pesisa appealed to the eternal truth of the Torah, and in our times we must do the same. We have Hashem on our side, we have the Torah on our side, and we have a 3,000-year history of Jewish struggle and triumph carrying us like a tidal wave towards the imminent redemption with Mashiach. Let's remember who we are and what we stand for, and take that confidence and pride with us into the week ahead. Your Jewish Week is produced by Chabad.org, written and recorded by me, Rabbi Dovi Paltiel. Theme music by Levi Gloshak.